Continuing here with that theme of the full desktop experience installation option, here for just a second, I want to show you that I've completed the install of this server and done some minor configuration that you may want to mirror. You can see here that I have a copy of my server, server 2, and I've given it an IP address here of 3.111. This here in my environment is a NAT address that my hypervisor, in my case VMware Workstation, but this works with the other hypervisors as well, is NAT translating the 3 address here out to the outside world so I can still talk to those outside machines. One area that you may not yet be ready to implement is the Active Directory domain company.pri. But hold on to this for just a minute because here in just a second I will show you one way in which you can rapidly deploy a copy of company.pri for your later use. And also really for your use here as I show you some of the things we'll be working with. I introduce this because I want to show you first how this installation of roles and features works here in the graphical version of this OS, to give us an appreciation for how things get quite a bit easier as we move into the use of PowerShell. Back over here under Dashboard is where I can go about adding in those roles and features. And you can see here that for the role-based or feature-based installation, I can choose my server, server 2 here, and then add in whatever server roles and also whatever server features that I really want to exist here for the workload that this server is charged with doing. This gives me the long list of all these different possible server roles and features, and in fact is really the way that a lot of us would go through on the console management of our different servers in previous versions of this OS. But this way of actually managing our OSs is one that, as I've said already, that Microsoft really kind of wants us to move away from, in part because of that whole desire to move people towards Windows Server Core. Let me shift over here away from the server's desktop and shift back here to my copy of Windows 10. This is that simulated Windows 10 desktop that we'll be using for all the different management activities that we'll be working with. Here on this desktop, you can see I've got a copy of Server Manager installed as part of the remote server administration tools. And here with Server Manager, you can add in other servers to manage. Now, just a second ago, I told you that we have this machine here in an Active Directory domain, but we don't actually have yet the Active Directory domain built, or you don't have the information necessary to build it. So hold on to this information for just a second until I give you the necessary bits that you need to create that Active Directory domain controller. I need that Active Directory here so that I can then punch in, for example, Server 2, because it exists in that Active Directory domain. Server 2, as you can see here, is a server that we can add in to our list of servers here. And if we have the appropriate permissions to be able to manage that machine, we can add it and its functions in here to our Server Manager instance for the management of this and other servers right here from our desktop. It's here where we can then also go through the addition of roles and features in the same wizard that we saw back on the server console, but rather remotely installing those roles and features here from Windows 10. As before, I'll choose a role-based or feature-based installation, and this time against Server 2. For that server, Server 2, we can once again see the list, the really long list of roles that exist here for installation onto that server, as well as the list of features here as well. Now, looking at this list of roles and features, you may be asking yourself, what exactly is the difference between a role and a feature? Let's talk for a minute about what features and roles really are, and so that I can give you a little mnemonic, at least my mnemonic, for how I figure out exactly where each function actually lives. First and foremost are the roles. The roles here in Windows are, at least as I like to describe it, something a Windows server aspires to be. You can think of a role as kind of a life goal that the server actually wants to be in terms of fulfilling its mission. Inside those roles are going to be then a series of functions that facilitate the actual activities of the role itself. These individual functions are what we term role services. And the functions, as you'll see when you go through the installation of each individual role, each role can have 0 to many different role services that are those functions that fulfill its aspirations. So when you go about checking the box to assign a role to a server, you then later on have the abilities to determine which role services within that role you want to enable as well. For example, if you attempt to install, Active Directory Certificate Services, there are about 5 or 6 role services that make up ADCS that you'll need to determine which you want to enable on that server. And so any implementation of a role will require usually some extra checkboxes to be checked to determine which role services then need to be enabled. Now, whereas these roles are something a server aspires to be, you'll see that there actually is a fairly limited list of what the roles possibly can be. But there are also some other miscellaneous things that go alongside these roles and role services. These miscellaneous other things are what we think of as the features. Features really are not any kind of functionality that aligns underneath the auspices of a role. Features are then other items, other possible activities that server can also accomplish. In reality, the separation of functionality between roles, role services, and features can seem a bit arbitrary, perhaps because in a way it kind of is. Microsoft had to make a decision as to how they would split up all these different functions, and so in a way they kind of had to just pick exactly where all these different functions should go. Again, the reality is that if you spend more time here with these, you'll eventually figure out which of these different components exist in which of these two different views here between features and server roles. I do want to show you that if you do choose, for example, one of the server roles here, let's just pick ADCS here, Active Directory Certificate Services. You should notice that in choosing it, we have the option of which role services we will then implement as we go through the installation here of the ADCS role. And in fact, if I choose next here and then next to go down to the role itself, it's these role services, all 6 of them, that make up the functionality that helps drive this server towards becoming what it wishes to be, which is an Active Directory Certificate Services machine. You will spend more time with these roles, role services, and features throughout the rest of this Server 2016 content. So let's leave our exploration here in just helping you understand exactly how you go through the first step in the process, which is getting those roles and features installed.